you do have ideas that there shouldn't be interracial marriage.
Hmm.
I've seen those clips. Can you explain why that is?
Yeah, it's not that I don't think there should be interracial marriage. I'm Catholic, so as you know, it's not a sin to be in an interracial marriage or relationship. But I am racist. I would say I believe in the races. I believe there are white people and black people and Hispanics and Asians, and I think that it's a core part of our identity. It's who we are, and there's like this conservative reflex to say we're colorblind. Race doesn't mean anything. And Pat Buchanan said this. He said it's not everything, but it isn't nothing.
Mm.
And I definitely lean more towards the latter, which is it really is a core part of who we are. Our culture, our heritage, our ancestors, our customs, all of it. It's not that I don't think that two people can fall in love from different races. Of course they can. And they have throughout history, and the races have mixed throughout history and assimilated. But for someone like myself, I always say on my show, it's just my value. I want to marry someone that looks like me, that comes from a similar background, because I want my kids to look like me. I want my grandkids to look like me.
But are you, sorry, I just want to make sure, did you say I'm a racialist or I'm a racist?
You know, for a long time, I would say I'm racialist.
Hmm.
Now I just say I'm racist.
Okay, so when you say you're racist,
Mhm,
because these definitions get changed
mhm.
around, racist, anti-Semitism gets expanded. What do you mean when you say I'm a racist? Because I think most people watching this would go, if you are a racist
Right,
in the traditional sense of the term, why are you on this podcast, right? Wouldn't you just go, you know what, Candace is black and she's therefore I don't want to speak to her.
right,
Certainly not going onto your show and saying, why won't Candace have me on? That doesn't really seem to line up with
right.
the traditional sense of the idea racist. So
Yeah, and I'm using it. I'm being a little tongue in cheek. I mean, for the purpose of understanding, I'd say my views are I'm a racialist. But I do think that we need to deconstruct this idea of racism in the sense that, look, you're black, I'm white. It is what it is. For my entire life, people have been walking around on eggshells about the subject of race, about white people being racist. Can I say this? Can I say that? Can I have this opinion? And me, I'm sort of, Gavin McInnes said it like this. He said, you're kind of post racist. You're sort of after this craze where everything was racist. It's sort of this recognition that we live in a heavily racial world. And, look, sometimes we have racist feelings. Racist feelings like, I want to live in a white neighborhood.
mhm.
I don't want to live in a black neighborhood. If they were all like you, obviously it'd be a different story. But when we think of a black neighborhood, we know what that means and why the property value
But
is
that's
cheap.
Black American. So this is why I want to understand this idea better because, and this is kind of something my cousin has said,
Mhm.
which I guess you could say is a racist statement, but she says that white people in America are the white trash of white people in the world, meaning that like there's a special category of uniquely that you don't see when you're dealing with like white Americans here that if you went across to just, I mean, like Switzerland, you wouldn't see this version of a white person necessarily, or this, you maybe went to the continent of Africa, you don't see this version of a black person either. Like even if you went to like to the tribes out in Africa that still
Mm.
exist, they would be a far cry from a black American living in a neighborhood in Compton, right?
Mhm.
So I'm trying to understand if you're actually, you think that it's all black people are like this, or if your world is kind of colored by this is what's going on in America. This has failed for 1,000 reasons. Welfarism has definitely, like, I mean, black people in 1940s stand up. My grandfather,
Mhm.
I talk about that denigration and the corrosion of
Yeah.
culture. That's happening. White, black, whatever you want to name it, there is this intentional corrosion of culture. Um, so do you think it's literally, well, this is just what a black person is when they come out? Or do you think that post welfare, LBJ, Great Society, this is what Black Americans have become. And I have a right to respond to that and say that as a white man, I don't want to live there.
Well, I think it's more nature than people would like to believe. There's this classic tension of is it nature, is it nurture, is it cultural, or is it intrinsic, is it racial? And I've always been on the latter side of this among conservatives. Conservatives like to say it's all culture. Black America is the way it is because of hip hop music and the Great Society and that kind of stuff. And I think the uncomfortable reality is a big part of it is intrinsic. One of the big arguments against the abolition of slavery in the 1860s is that, when Europeans colonized Africa, they hadn't discovered the wheel. There's no two-story buildings. There's no writing. There's no written language. Missionaries had to go to Africa in the last century and invent it for the African people because there's no recorded history. They didn't have writing. You
So Egypt is not in Africa.
Well, Egypt is a different race. The Egyptians were not black.
Okay, but you said when they went to Africa. So I just want to.
The interior of Africa in the late 19th century, scramble
Okay,
for
so
Africa.
we're now knocking Egypt out of Africa.
Well, Egypt is part of Northern Africa.
Right, but it's
Sub-Saharan
Africa.
Africa.
You said Africa, so I'm being, but it's not. I'm not trying to be. I'm not trying to get a gotcha. I'm just responding. You're saying
Okay, sure.
Africa.
Yeah.
It's in Africa. It's Egypt. It's kind of ridiculous to say there was no written language. So I'm
Well,
just trying to get you to,
sure.
you know,
Egyptians are not
if I'm not
Africans.
pushing back, the internet will. So
Egyptians are not racial Africans. When I say African, I'm saying sub-Saharan Africans,
sub-Saharan. Okay,
black
say that.
people that, yeah, because it is a different race. In sub-Saharan Africa, and we didn't, Europeans did not penetrate that until late 19th century. They didn't have any of this. To the extent that you have infrastructure in Africa, it's from the Muslims in the Sahel, in the Maghreb, in northern Africa, where the Arabs colonized. And then you had, Carthage and Egypt, you had ancient civilizations. But sub-Saharan Africa, they didn't have that. You take these people out of that land and put them here, and they're enslaved people. You let them free in a modern, liberal republic, they're not going to succeed. It's not going to go well for them. And that was one of the arguments against abolition. People said if you free them without any assimilation, without any kind of process for them to be acclimated, they're going to die. And that's exactly what happened. Many of like the bottom 10% of like the lowest IQ Africans just died off for generations. And it had a, and pardon the expression, but it had a eugenic effect because over time, if the weakest are dying off, that's one argument for why blacks in America have a standard deviation higher IQ than the blacks in sub-Saharan Africa. So, so I do believe there is something intrinsic going on there. And what makes people uncomfortable about this is the idea that it's unchangeable. There's something about, and this is why I'm a Catholic, we do have an inherent desire for universalism. We do believe that there's a common humanity and a common human community and all of that. We hate the idea that we're born a certain way and we can never change. And that's just the way it is. And we even think about this in terms of, it's become not so popular these days to tell children, you can be whatever you want to be. Because we know that's not the case. Some people are tall, some people are short, some people are smart, some dumb, some ugly, some handsome. That's why, by the way, incel dumb is a big part of this also.
So you believe these are immutable characteristics that are assigned at birth?
I think that, yes.
For the most part.
Things like race, all those attributes are immutable and unchangeable. And
but they have changed. Just factually speaking, they have changed.
They change over time, over the generations.
Okay, so then you don't think it's immutable because if this was an immutable
individual person.
Okay, so you're saying that if you are born at this space and time as a black person in America, here is the cards that you're dealt with, and you can't change that over time.
Something like IQ does not change. No, it doesn't change wildly. It only changes genetically over. IQ is a big one, and that changes. That's a genetic trait. And so that can change over the generations, but not, you can't take an individual that's 75 IQ, which is the average in West Africa, and take them to 100.
So two dumb people can't produce a smart person.
I believe they can actually.
Yeah.
But.
So does that kind of debunk your.
No, because it's rare that happens, but IQ is a heritable trait, so it's unlikely that happens.
Okay.
And do you not recognize that there's group differences in IQ? Or?
I think that there's group differences, but okay. I wouldn't say, and the reason why I'm pushing back on this is because those perspectives that you hold, Thomas Sowell did a really good job debunking that. And I think the book is called Intellectuals and Race, and he opens up and makes a very sound argument that these characteristics are not immutable and that it can be your environment. And he kind of goes back and discusses who had the highest IQ and who now has the highest IQ. And so I just disagree with you fundamentally, but you have a right to have that perspective.
So you don't think that there's group differences on average between the races?
I think, just to be clear, I think there would be group differences if you took it, like we were talking about, an American versus somebody who graduates college in Europe. There'd be tremendous differences. Not
tremendous, but yeah, there would be slight differences, but you don't think that racially there's differences between races?
I think, yeah, because we have huge differences culturally. So going to your point of saying, I don't want to live in a black neighborhood, well, neither does LeBron James when he gets money, right? And there's a reason for that, because there is something that's happening culturally in Black America that's been going on for a very long time. But that thing, I would argue, didn't exist in.
What about in Africa and Haiti? I mean, they're killing and eating each other in Africa and Haiti. Everywhere where they are, you have these problems.
Yeah, I'd like to look into, and I'm pleading ignorant, but I've heard some things about what happened in Haiti and what the Clinton Foundation did there. So I think I'd have to look more into the history of Haiti to be able to push back on that at all. I don't think I agree with that.
What about all of Africa then? There's not one country in sub-Saharan Africa that's successful. Not one. They're all least developed countries. They're all
Yeah.
failed states.
This kind of reminds me, and we could kind of flesh out this conversation together, and I'm not perhaps ready to have it fully, but I do remember going back to Dave Smith where he was conceding a point on, well, all of these other Middle Eastern countries, no, you wouldn't want to live there. You'd want to live in Israel. In my mind, I'm going, well, because you just keep bombing the crap out of them if they ever try to get ahead. I remember watching this clip of him saying that, going, why don't these countries get ahead? And kind of going back in my mind to the Gaddafi speech where he was speaking essentially about, you know, here's what we got to do in Libya to get ahead. Here's what we're going to do with the dollar, and we're going to be progressive and this and that, and they killed him. And then what happened to those Libyan refugees? Suddenly they're now pouring into, just like he said was going to happen, that they were now pouring into the European continent, and Europeans are complaining, who are these people? And so the question is, are we allowing, because I'm like, Africa's a pretty rich country. Like, why aren't
Yeah.
Africans controlling the diamond trade? Who's taking all of the diamonds so that they can't control the diamond trade? And how long have these people been doing that, being essentially culture vultures? That's kind of the journey that I've been on now in terms of really trying to go back and look into history to see what's happened.
Hmm.
And I never trust myself when I have a perspective now, because I realize how much of my opinions and beliefs were shaped by the public school system.
Hmm.
And so I don't think you're right. I think that there has been a very sophisticated effort um, to, just like you would say now, in terms of people that are intentionally attacking Anglo-Saxons. I'm just learning about that there were these books that were written to, we must genocide the Anglo-Saxons, that were going on for a lot longer than I realized. History didn't begin with World War II, but I think it would take a lot of time to kind of unpack that.
Yeah.
Like, are we stopping people from getting ahead just because, I don't know.
That just sound, I mean, being honest with you, that just sounds to me like a left-wing argument when they say, why don't these countries get ahead?
Mm.
Colonialism. You're a colonizer. It's like, okay, but when we got there, they had no development. When we got to Africa, they had no technological development,
So you
no
think
recorded
that
history.
even if we weren't at war, and sure, you could say that you think that's a leftist argument. I would only push back on that because I've learned so much about just like recent history that I didn't know. But you think that the Middle East, like, if we had done nothing in terms of the Middle East, that they would just be savages and just be like, America didn't do anything to it doesn't set anything backwards, and you're just like bombing a place.
Yeah, kind of. I think that we did set them back because when they don't have political order, it prevents development and investment and things like that. But again, when you look at the antecedents of all these, the history didn't start, like you said, with World War II in the 20th century. There's a reason that European civilization created this enormous gap between them and everybody else. And I don't think it was that it was white supremacy or it was unfair or something like that. I think it's because Europeans are smarter. I think that on average,
So
Europeans
to
are
use your
smarter.
argument against you, that could be said about Ashkenazis. So if you're sitting here saying, I believe in some conspiracy and
Mhm.
that it's a coordinated effort and blah, 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 they could look at you and say, that's a leftist argument. We're just smarter.
I
Do you
think they
agree?
are smart.
They are
I think
smarter,
they're
the
probably
smartest.
I would say this. I would say they're probably as smart as the smartest white race, but the difference between the Jews and the white people is that they work as a team. And so if you look at, for example, things like transportation, white people invented every mode of transportation: railroad, cars, airplanes, all of it. When you look at fields of knowledge, white people invented all that: chemistry, anthropology, all that stuff. So white people really did give birth to the modern world in a major way. Jewish people are high verbal IQ because they're lawyers, they're rabbis. That's what a rabbi is a lawyer. That's what the Talmud is. It's a lawyerly back and forth. And so they're skilled at some things, and you're not wrong. They're extremely educated, they're extremely intelligent. They're a unique case where, 2% of the population overrepresented 2,000%. Are they 2,000% smarter? Answer is no. Because if you look at the standardized testing, the top scores in the high school standardized test are almost all Asians in math and science. Asians aren't overrepresented in power.
Mm.
It's Jewish people. So Jewish people are not, proportionally as more intelligent as they are more overrepresented. And that goes to their real superpower, which is they're an organized minority. An organized minority will be the disorganized majority. As far as Africa is concerned, they didn't have the wheel. We got there, they didn't have the wheel. And it's unfortunate. It's not anything that people are happy about. I don't believe that makes Africans inferior. But I do think that that explains their relative level of development that has been persistent over centuries, millennia.
Mm. Yeah, I'd probably just disagree with that point altogether.